Welcome back, children. Let's have a sit for part 2 of Mr. Nickel.
Mr. Nickel smelled the air. It was an acrid, static taste to it. He walked softly, listening past the echoing drips of leaking water, listening past the whispering fire that burned in his veins. He heard movement, and he suspected that he knew which kind. The old wretch crept to his gear. He slowly slid a rusty arm's-length blade from a faded denim bag. Instantaneously, he rippled with electricity. His face became real for a time. Stitches crisscrossed his body. There was a cold, hard steel blocking over one eye. Mr. Nickel rubbed the blade, and in that moment, the metal became polished and pristine. When his inner flame flared, he heard movement. Something felt him and became impatient. He walked towards the downed train and noticed that the hole that was as big as a small dog was now a hole as big as a car. The passage went deeper into some long-forgotten extremity of the city. But that wasn't his problem. This one was big. As soon as Mr. Nickel came to the realization he was in danger, a thunderous boom happened on the top of one of the downed train cars. The battle-hardened wretch whirled around to the tune of the booming and cracking glass. The creature was huge, at least the size of a bear, but it bore no resemblance to anything living in the natural world. There were numerous gangly arms and legs placed in asymmetrical locations on its body. Its head was somewhat human, but stretched beyond the proportions of what could be considered natural. Its spiked bones, claws, and teeth tore out of its discolored skin. Its torso was stretched. It howled as intimidation, not knowing that Mr. Nickel had killed many of his like many times before, and there was almost nothing that could rattle him. The old vagrant didn't waste time overthinking it. He took his right foot and kicked the ancient train car so hard it flipped over twice, taking the abomination with it. The wretch walked over to the metal on top of the creature, knowing it couldn't be so easy. It never was. Slowly, the creaking steel of the ancient train car rustled, and the beast matched Nickel's feat of unimaginable strength with a feat of unimaginable strength of his own. Like Atlas, the mythical titan that bore the weight of the world on his shoulders, the abomination rose with the train car on its back. Mr. Nickel didn't waste time being impressed. He wanted it over. He took his blade and swung it with all his might. The abomination's head tumbled from his body, dropping its burden. Nickel dove, but the mass of metal cracked his hand. It was dead, he hoped. He didn't want to risk a fairer fight, if there ever was such a thing. After the boom of the massive steel, there was silence. Silence eerily more mysterious than the noise. Mr. Nickel breathed a sigh of relief. He put his back on the old train car and lazily glanced over to the protruding hole in the wall. Suddenly, it seemed as if his agenda for the day was filled up. If he were going to keep this place, he was going to have to secure it. Nickel waited for a moment. He heard a conflagration of chatter in his head. It was a police band. It was nothing. There was an accident that happened on the expressway. No one reported explosive noise to his knowledge. Nickel slowly lifted the mangled train car for what he was certain was a mockery. He carefully put the body a distance away from the head and drug its twisted remains to a wall. Nickel had to fully dismember the thing, just to be certain. He had seen too many of them come back. This one was nasty. God only knew how many of his kind had killed to grow so immense. Didn't matter. Wasn't killing anyone now. Nickel took his flashlight from his bag, and he had one that attached to his shoulder and another to wrap around his head. He didn't bother with batteries. His body produced enough electricity to run the thing alone. The vagrant grabbed hold of his clothes and did a transmutation. He strengthened what would normally be rags into something tougher than leather. It was the way of alchemy. There was nothing left to do but to do it. He went into the darkness, ready to face whatever may rear its head. This was his life. This was his everyday. face the monster, hide, move along. He wasn't sure if he liked it, but there was something comfortable and routine. Nickel spent the better side of a day traversing forgotten train tunnels. Most were collapsed and didn't really lead anywhere in particular. He did find a tunnel or two that connected to a working underground train. He didn't bother looking for more mockeries because, as far as he was concerned, just moving around may be stirring up unnatural abominations. He did, in fact, move blocks so big that no one, human, could move without heavy machinery. Nickel smelled the dawn coming, so he decided to hightail it back to his lair. The wretch sat in the same spot that he had been for the past handful of days, and like deja vu, he saw the same boy blazing a trail across the open field before his underpass. Mr. Nickel shook his head as if personally appalled that someone would allow themselves to be taken advantage of every day of their life. Didn't the boy have any pride? He sighed. Looking from the underpass foliage, he seriously considered sitting back and letting the boy fend for himself, but it wasn't in his nature to let things like that slide. The vagrant slowly walked down the sloping path towards the underpass, which was where Jeremy seemed to lose steam. Mr. Nickel waited for a moment, letting Jeremy take a few shots to the jaw before making his presence known. He felt that the kid should know what pain felt like since he seemed to like it so much. "Alright, you little motherfuckers, you had your fun. Now get the fuck out from my underpass," Mr. Nickel said, folding his arms, not bothering to be intimidating anymore. He already knew just how much of a badass he was. The bullies ran along without much resistance. "What is your problem, kid? You like it when people whip your ass like that?" Nickel said with more anger than he used on the bullies. Jeremy stood up and shifted his book bag. He was lanky, but he slumped over a lot. "There are too many of them. I can't fight them all," said Jeremy. "So you'd rather take an ass whooping then?" asked Mr. Nickel. "They'd just beat me harder if I fought back," Jeremy said. Nickel shook his head as if that sort of talk was really shaking his faith in mankind as a species. "You kick your ass every day because they know you're not going to do anything. You have to put your head down and take your beating. But show 'em you're not rolling over. You hear me?" Mr. Nickel said as if he meant it. "Will you teach me?" said Jeremy. Mr. Nickel turned his head, though he was tempted to have someone to talk to other than the voices in his head. He knew where this would go. The older he got, the quicker he had to move, and the quicker humans turned on him. He was absolutely shocked that this boy was still talking to him now. "I can't teach you nothing. You gotta learn things on your own," said the vagrant. "Nothing? Not even the leg sweep?" Jeremy said. Mr. Nickel looked up to the sky for a moment. He was certainly going to regret what he did next. "Come here, you don't need none of that shit. You need to learn how to throw a punch." Jeremy slowly approached, almost scared that he pushed the issue.